panel. Scott Dworkin, senior advisor to the Democratic Coalition Against Trump, journalist Sarah Kendzior, MSNBC contributor Naveed Jamali, and Mother Jones Washington bureau chief David Korn. David, I'm going to ask you about impeachment in a second, but Naveed, I really want to quickly ask you about this SF-86 issue. The idea by the Kushner team that the reason his first filing in January had no foreign contacts listed on it was because an aide accidentally hit send. Does that seem credible to you?
I mean, it's just outrageous. And you can't just look at one of these instances in its singularity. Look at the totality of everything that's happened. And it's frankly an insult that this man still has a clearance. I mean, look, Joy, at the end of the day, if the president wants to come out and say there's two sets of standards, there's a set of standards that applies to my family, whether by marriage or by blood, and there's a second set of standards that applies to everyone else, he should come out and say that. But if we have one set of standards for clearances, for the institutions that grant them, that grant access to top secret clearance, then he should be held to the standard that everyone else is. I'll just say this last thing. You know, if you're a police officer, and God forbid you're involved in a shooting, regardless of whether the outcome of the shooting is justified, your gun is taken until the investigation is done. This is a similar thing. Regardless of whether Jared Kushner is going to be charged with anything, he eventually will be found guilty or innocent. He's the subject of an investigation. This is the time to remove his clearance. Anyone else would have lost their clearance a long, long time ago. And I have to say, it just sets two standards. And at the core of the presidency, that seems to be the modus operandi of the Trump administration. And
David, yet you see nothing has happened, and Republicans have called it a stunt for Democrats to ask for Jared Kushner's security clearance to be cleared. This despite the fact that McClatchy reported this week that that investigators into the Trump-Russia affair are now probing whether Jared Kushner's digital operation he was running for the campaign might have been involved in the dissemination of Russian hacked material or propaganda, and that NBC News reported on June 5th that Kushner may have been, that Congress is potentially asking whether Kushner has been going around seeking bailout, seeking Russian money to bail out 666 Fifth Avenue, which we know is deeply in debt, and which could be some of the source of the Russians' interest in him, because that could be a vulnerability. And yet there is no sign that either there will be an impeachment of Donald Trump. Republicans are basically saying there's nothing wrong with collusion. And there's no sign that Jared Kushner will lose his security clearance. What do you make of it?
The Republicans have clearly made a calculation. They will abide by anything. And I mean anything, maybe even Donald Trump going on Fifth Avenue and shooting someone, as he once discussed, in order to get tax cuts for the rich, budget cuts for the poor, and a repeal of Obamacare. They will not take any steps against Donald Trump or even criticize him beyond maybe a mild rebuke, because it will threaten their policy agenda that I just outlined. I mean, to me, the big picture this week that came out of this was not the meeting itself, which may or may not have led to negative information being passed. We certainly can't believe anything that anyone who was in the meeting says, since they've lied about it repeatedly. But to me, the big thing was that here is clear evidence that a Putin crony, the national prosecutor in Moscow, conspired with Donald Trump's business partner, Aris in Moscow, to get negative information to the Trump campaign through Emin and Rob Goldstone. We've talked about that. And that Don Jr., Jared Kushner, and Paul Manafort came running and eagerly joined, you have to call it a conspiracy. And then they continued to lie about it. And then when Russia was accused of mucking about and meddling in the election, they knew that was true to some extent, and they continued to say no. So they protected Putin's conspiratorial operation against America. So it doesn't even matter what happened at the meeting itself. It might, but that's the big picture here. And Republicans in Congress refuse to acknowledge that, because tax cuts and repealing Obamacare are just more important to them.
Yeah, and Scott, now having known, Malcolm Nance and Naveed Jamali for a year now, and talked about all this spy stuff with them, it's obvious that if there was a vulnerability for Jared Kushner specifically, and maybe even for the Trump family, money feels like it's a part of it. To go back to this NBC News scoop on June 5th, that one of the questions Kushner is expected to be asked by Congress, by these congressional committees, is whether he tried to set up a secret back channel way of communicating with the Russians so he could find someone in Moscow to take the 41-story tower at 666 Fifth Avenue off his family's hands. You know, he had mounting debts, and that he even apparently tried to muscle Qatar for money, for loans, etc. What do you make of the sort of business side, money need aspects of Russiagate?
It seems like they have no moral standard when it comes to what kind of money they're willing to accept and what kind of money they're not willing to accept. And I think it's coming back to haunt them now. They think that the rules don't apply to them. They think the rule of the in America don't apply to them. And I'll tell you, when it comes down to it, most of these people are guilty when it comes to the court of public opinion, especially with Trump. So if it comes to impeachment for Trump, I think it's pretty simple. He's guilty in the court of public opinion, and I think we need to make it clear that it's a political opportunity for us to make sure that we actually can impeach. When it comes to this money, I think most of it's dirty money. It's blood money when it comes down to it. This is disgusting. You know, these are people who are gang members, mob members, who deal with human trafficking and just abhorrent things. And it's not something that's representative of our democracy. And he's just blowing everything that the United States has been built for over the past few hundred years.
And you're talking about on the Russia side, of course, the mob stuff, right, on the Russia side. But,
right.
And Sarah, and yet, Sarah, the impunity with which Donald Trump has been able to do all of this, whether it is flouting the emoluments cause, he's making money off of being president. These meetings we just keep finding out about more and more and more Russia meetings. The one with Jared Kushner saying he wanted a secret back channel, secret communications. There seems to be nothing so outrageous that it causes a reaction, a political reaction. Are we seeing, you talk a lot about autocracy, isn't this the essence of it, that the leader can get away with literally anything?
Yeah, and they're very brazen about it. They're blatant about it on purpose, and that's to instill a sense of helplessness in the population. They're basically saying, we know that you know what we did, and there's nothing that you can do. And they've continued to do this in this way. When Donald Trump Jr. released those emails on Twitter, that was a sign that he believes that quite possibly they won't face repercussions. And if Trump has consolidated executive power, if he has the ability to issue presidential pardons, and if people like Jeff Sessions, who is of course also implicated in the Russian interference scandal, aren't going to act to actually prosecute people when evidence comes in, then yeah, they do have, you know, a kind of immunity from consequence. And that's an absolute tragedy for American democracy that either party should consider. There's no future for the Republican Party in this kind of system. You're looking at a dynastic kleptocracy in which Republican leaders will also be denied opportunity and the ability to advance their positions and careers because they'll be subservient to Trump and his Kremlin colleagues to whom you know, he himself is subservient. And that's a terrible situation for this country.
And Naveed, you know, you had all of this also happening when it's not clear that the Russians actually even had anything significant to give, that they simply dangled the possibility that they could get Hillary Clinton's 33,000 emails and got all of this access.
That's absolutely right. Look, just by taking this meeting, that was enough to hold something over the Trump campaign and perhaps Trump himself. Look, and there seems to be a pattern here. We see with this meeting, with the Peter Smith, where the potential that the Russians pushed out this idea that they had Hillary Clinton's 33,000 emails. I mean, look, at the end of the day, and Peter Smith took that back. And we see then Donald Trump going on national TV and saying in two separate occasions, once after this meeting with Donald Jr., you know, saying that there's going to be dirt coming out in a future press release, and then secondly going and asking Russia to release these 33,000 emails and saying that they'll be, you know, mightily rewarded. It's so clear that the Russians completely manipulated the Trump team and just overacted on them. And I have to say the last thing here, I mean, there's just a level of sleaze that the people that the Russians use, the people that were able to get into this Trump circle is fascinating and both shocking. At this point, I wouldn't be surprised to hear that Scott Baio was driving the Uber and they stopped at a Subway with tequila. So it's crazy.
David, I'm going to give you the last word on this because the question is it that the Trump people were easily manipulated or that they were actively attempting to use Russian
I don't think they were. I don't think they were manipulated. You have Trump's business partner in Moscow, Aris Agalarov, who he was trying to do, he did Miss Universe with, he was trying to do towers with, coming through Emin, who Trump had a very warm father-son-like relationship with, and that was, part of the conspiracy. I hope at the end of the day that, we may have to rely on what Robert Mueller does.